You know someone like this? They're brilliant, insightful, they have thoughts that would genuinely help people. But their social media, empty, their LinkedIn, rarely updated, their Twitter, either non-existent or just retweets. And here's what's weird. They're not shy, they're not antisocial, they have no problem sharing ideas in person. So what's actually stopping them? Because I promise you, it's not what you think. Most people assume these folks are just private. They'll say things like, oh, they don't want attention, or they're above all that social media stuff. And sure, sometimes that's true, but here's the thing, when you actually talk to people who never post online, you hear a different story. They'll tell you they started writing a post 3 times last week, deleted all 3. They'll tell you they have screenshots of tweets they almost sent, just sitting in their camera roll. They'll tell you they rehearse what they'd say, word for word. And then, nothing. This isn't about being private. This is about something much deeper. Because these same people, they're often incredibly articulate in conversations. They give phenomenal advice to friends. They write detailed emails that change people's perspectives. They have no problem expressing themselves until there's a publish button. Now, contrast that with the people who post constantly. We all know them too. They'll share half-baked thoughts. They'll post controversial takes just to post them. They'll hit publish on things they clearly didn't think through, and you might assume, oh, those people are just more confident. But watch them in real life, half the time. They're actually less certain than the people who never post. I know a guy who tweets 15 times a day, bold predictions, hot takes, the works. In person, he changes his mind mid-sentence. He'll literally say something and then immediately backtrack. Meanwhile, I know a woman who's never posted a single original thought on social media. But when she speaks, it's like she's been refining the idea for months because she has been. So what's the difference? Why does the uncertain person post without hesitation while the thoughtful person never hits publish? Here's what's actually happening. People who never post online have an overdeveloped sense of epistemic humility. Stay with me. Epistemic humility is basically this: the awareness that you might be wrong, that your understanding is incomplete, that there's always more to know. And look, that sounds great, right? We're supposed to value humility. But here's the paradox. The people with the most to offer are often the ones most aware of how much they don't know. The programmer who could write helpful tutorials, she's acutely aware of edge cases she hasn't considered. The therapist who could share mental health insights, he's thinking about the 50 nuances he can't fit into a tweet. The strategist who could break down complex systems, she's cataloging all the factors she might be oversimplifying. And so they don't post, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're hyper-aware of everything they're not saying. Meanwhile, the person with shallow expertise, they don't see those gaps, so they post with total confidence. This is the curse of knowledge meeting the paralysis of precision. Let me show you exactly how this works. When most people consider posting something, they run a simple calculation. Is this interesting? Would people care? If yes, they post. But people with high epistemic humility run a completely different calculation. They think, is this accurate? What am I leaving out? Who might this mislead? What counterarguments exist? Am I qualified to say this? 5 questions instead of 1. And here's the thing, those are good questions, but they create a problem, because the standard for posting becomes, have I accounted for every possible angle, qualification, and exception? And that standard, it's impossible to meet in 280 characters or even in a 10-minute video. So the calculation always comes back, not ready, not complete, not good enough. The irony is brutal. The person who'd add the most value is the one most paralyzed by the gaps in their own knowledge, while the person who adds the least value never sees those gaps in the first place. So how do you actually fix this? First strategy: calibrated confidence. Here's what I mean. People who never post are usually waiting to feel certain before they share. But here's the thing, that feeling never comes, because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So instead of waiting for certainty, you need external calibrators. Here's how this works. Before posting, ask yourself 3 questions. 1. Would I say this to a friend who asked me about this topic? If you'd say it in conversation, it's probably worth posting. 2. Have I thought about this more than 90% of people? You don't need to be the world's leading expert, you need to be ahead of the baseline. 3. Can I clearly label what I'm uncertain about? If you can name your uncertainties, you can share despite them. Example, a programmer I know was terrified to post coding tutorials. Why? Because she kept thinking about edge cases, alternative approaches, and scenarios where her solution wouldn't work. So she started adding one line to every tutorial. This works for X scenario. For Y and Z, you'd need a different approach. Boom, posted. The qualification didn't make it less valuable. It made it more trustworthy. Second strategy, strategic humility. This is about getting precise with your boundaries. People with high epistemic humility often reject entire topics. They'll think, I can't speak about education because I don't have a PhD in pedagogy. But that's binary thinking. You don't know everything about education, but you know something about learning. So instead of saying, I can't talk about this, get specific. I can speak to what worked for me as a self-taught developer. I can share what I observed managing a team, not what applies to all management. I can explain this framework as I understand it, not as the definitive interpretation. See the difference? You're not claiming universal expertise, you're claiming narrow, specific experience. And here's what's beautiful about this, it's actually more valuable, because people don't need your perfect comprehensive theory. They need your specific, grounded, real-world observation. A speaker I know was paralyzed about sharing public speaking advice. Why? Because he wasn't a professional speaker, he just gave a lot of talks, so he reframed. Here's what reduced my anxiety before presentations. Not the ultimate guide to public speaking. Just here's what worked for me. That post got more engagement than anything he'd ever shared, because it wasn't trying to be definitive. It was trying to be useful. Third strategy, systematic doubt capture. This one's tactical. Here's the problem, when you're drafting a post, all your doubts swirl in your head simultaneously. What about this exception? What if someone misinterprets? Am I oversimplifying? And because they're all swirling together, they feel overwhelming. So you need to externalize them. Here's the system. Keep a doubt document alongside whatever you're writing. Every time you think, but what about, write it down. Don't engage with it. Don't fix it. Just capture it. Then once your main point is drafted, look at your doubt list. Most of them, you'll realize they're edge cases that don't invalidate your main point. A few, you'll add as qualifications. One or two might actually change your position, and that's good to know before posting. A therapist I know used this method. She wanted to share an insight about boundaries, but kept thinking of scenarios where her advice wouldn't apply. So she listed every doubt. What about family dynamics? What about cultural differences? What about trauma responses? Then she looked at the list. Most of those were worth a sentence of qualification, not full paralysis. So she added, this applies to peer relationships with reasonable people. Family dynamics and trauma require different approaches. Post-published, the doubts didn't disappear, they just got organized. Here's the thing about epistemic humility, it's not your enemy. The world genuinely needs more people who think carefully before speaking, those who consider consequences, those who acknowledge limitations, those who avoid false certainty. We don't need less of that. But we need it to be actionable, not paralyzing. Because right now, the people who should be sharing, who have depth, nuance, and genuine expertise, are silent, while people with half their insight post with full confidence. That's backwards. And it means the internet is filled with shallow certainty instead of deep nuance. So your epistemic humility isn't the problem. The problem is letting it become epistemic silence. You can be uncertain and valuable. You can acknowledge gaps and contribute. You can be humble and heard. Those aren't contradictions. They're how you make sure the best ideas actually reach people. So here's what I want you to do. If you're someone who never posts, if you have that screenshot folder of almost tweets, do this. Pick one idea you've been sitting on. Run it through those 3 strategies. Use calibrated confidence. Would you say it to a friend? Use strategic humility. Can you narrow your claim to what you actually know? Use systematic doubt capture. Write down your concerns separately, then publish it. Not because it's perfect, but because it's valuable. And the world needs more valuable than it needs perfect. And speaking of things that are valuable but imperfect, if you got something from this video, subscribe, because I make content for people who think deeply, sometimes too deeply. This channel is about turning that depth into action. Thanks for watching, and if you're still sitting on that idea, this is your sign, post it.